Welcome to Feed the Trolls. I'm once again on the shitty headset mic. I do apologize, but I am in Romania. I actually forgot where I was for a minute, which is a bit awkward to start the major cycle. And it seems only fitting because we are going to be doing the Americas RMRs when you're watching this. Instead of talking about an American team, we want to focus on what's coming up, which is this far superior Counter-Strike, the European RMRs, and specifically a team which I think needs a little bit more focus because we've spoken about them, but they don't get as much airtime, which makes no sense because they're probably one of the greatest of all time. It is, of course, FaZe and the massive drop-off that we've seen from them. Pimp is here to give us some insight. And Thorin, when I say massive drop-off, instead of winning tournaments, they're just finishing in the top 8, which I think if it was complexity, people would be celebrating and cheering that NACS is back, right?
Sure, but that also does actually appropriately frame the different expectations for teams and players, though, because you are right. Like that would, for a normal pro player, let's just take the average tier 1 pro, that's actually basically almost the sweet spot of where you just want to be. That's actually like in contention. You make, like, imagine if you were the players, by the way, on the Mongols who are ranked much higher than them. That's exactly where you want to be, just into some playoffs. Maybe you win the odd one, make a semi-final. Within that ranking, by the way, usually a team around there would be like, going and winning a small tier 2 tournament. I think actually there's one of the problems FaZe has. They're not the one that go to ESL Challenger and then win that and then go like, oh, we're still dangerous or whatever. Whereas the calls of the world try to do it. The Virtus Pros do that. So one of the problems I do think you have if you're FaZe Clan is we only think of FaZe when it's the big events. And they not only don't win those, as you're saying, they basically just creep into the interesting part and then don't do anything. In fact, I actually think the worst thing about this team is it reminds me of one of the interesting things about how consistency shows in Counter-Strike, which is when we talk about ratings and average numbers, and obviously we have a massive sample size in Counter-Strike. It's one of the best esports for that, actually, because people play so many matches. I always tell people, if you're a big fan of, like, an example would be like Fallen, for example, a player I think is quite washed at this point in his career, they're not really going to have, like, 200 maps in a row where they never ever pop off. They're still going to have, like, I don't know, 1 out of every 5 maps he's going to have like a halfway pops off. So if you're like a really deluded fan, that might be enough to sustain you. It might make you think, oh, it's the real Fallen. And the reason I bring that analogy up is I feel like that's what we've had from this current lineup of FaZe Clan the whole year, pretty much. Once they dropped off being the top dogs at Chengdu, they've just become this team where it's like, you still see the glimpses. In fact, usually even in a tournament, you'll still see one series where either they do like get a decent win, or even worse, they do like the classic one where, which by the way, I think Team Liquid does all the time too, where you almost beat a really good team. You have that like 13-11-3 mapper, or you have one map that looks really good, but you never do get the big win. You never do make the deep run. You don't even do what, like, put it this way, I might have been pretty harsh to people like Eternal Fire. Eternal Fire right now, way more of a dark horse to make a final or win a tournament than FaZe Clan is. So I think that's pretty telling, right? If you bring it all the way back to at the beginning where you contrast them with Call, I'm just pointing out, basically, right now, Eternal Fire would be more dangerous than FaZe. That is an inconceivable thought at the beginning of this year.
I mean, Pimp, would you have seen that? If I think back to the beginning of the year, we had 2 second places at like Kato and the Major. They win Chengdu and then just nothing. I mean, at the beginning of the year, they looked like the team that everyone was going to have to beat.
Yeah, yes and no, because I feel like at the end of the last year, they were the team to beat. They were getting into all the finals, they were winning tournaments, and they got off to such a strong start with Counter-Strike 2, in particular Rupsh. So we had conversation around him, labeling him as perhaps the best rifler in the game in the early stages. So I think we already started to see the downfall, and that sounds ridiculous to say, but even at the PGL Major in Copenhagen, I know they got into the final, but the way they got into the final, the way they're playing in the group stage, the expectations of them in the playoff, I remember it as being a surprise that FaZe even got into the quarterfinal. I remember it being a surprise they got into the semifinal, and I remember it being a bit of a surprise they even got it into the final. And then, they did lose to Na'Vi before Na'Vi became really, really good. So in some ways, that was a disappointing final for them to play. And I feel like that was when we saw the early stages of it. Then Katowice was a good performance, obviously, for FaZe, but I still feel it was a time where most teams were still trying to find their footing and stabilize, and then Spirit came out of nowhere. So I think we saw early signs of what were to come for FaZe, and it's always easy in hindsight to say that, but even those second places, even winning IM Chengdu and even, getting into the major final, it wasn't as convincing as it had been for FaZe, because I'm not really that surprised that we then got to see them struggle for a little bit. What surprises me the most is the consistency they've been awful at. And I say awful with a grain of salt. It's as Duncan said, it's a top 6 team, top 5 team. They occasionally get into the playoff. Occasionally they get a big win at a tournament. But as he said, they never really get the big run of streak, so to speak, getting into the finals or getting into the semifinals even anymore. So it is disappointing for a team that dominated the first 6 months of Counter-Strike 2 that they're unable to even contest for semifinals, let alone finals, in a game that, 5-6 months ago, they were arguably the best at.
So we did an episode on FaZe a couple of months ago, and Vitality as well. And one of the things that we brought up in the conversation as to why FaZe was struggling was stuff that was said sort of online and in interviews, and certain people had weighed in saying, okay, well, it turns out that like there's the roster change that's happened. Rops is trying to adjust to Frozen. Twist isn't there anymore. We've got to give them a little bit of time. But now if I look back after all these months, Pimp, I'd argue that's not what's happening because it's still going on. They've had time to adjust to the changes, right? We can't really blame the fact that Twist left at the end of last year, beginning of this year.
I've been thinking a lot of different things to myself, and I want to throw that out here in the air and maybe hear you guys' take on it as well, because I can't really do it on this no, but it's like on this segment we're very constricted on time. But
right, I see what you mean.
Every time I'm trying to quantify what's going on with FaZe, why they're not playing better than they are. Obviously, the easy answer is some of the individuals are not performing anymore, not to the same degree. Obviously, Rob's dropped off a little bit, Brokey has dropped off. Even, to some degree, Karrigan is starting to struggle a bit more as an individual, and I almost every single time I'm standing on a stage, I want to say that I think we need to put spotlight on Karrigan, and I think we need to spotlight in terms of how he's running his teams and what's going on within FaZe, because the way he's structuring a team and the way he's been a leader for the past years is that he needs strong individuals to give out the freedom that he wants to give out whenever he's calling. He's not a guy that is putting down a system. He's not a guy that demands players to be in position at all times or demands players to be in certain roles and do certain things that then construct around into something masterful of a call. He's more like a free-flowing caller, even in the essence that his coach next to him, you had Neo, you had Robin, in all history, the way he thinks about a coach is that he wants the coach to be his right-hand man. He doesn't want the coach to challenge him too much. It's still Karrigan's teams. He's running it like he wants to. He just want to make sure that the coach is not a problem for him, more so than a guy that can back him up whenever he's, need a bit of confidence or whenever some players are maybe starting to act out. So Karrigan is not the leader that we think he is, in the sense that he's very one-dimensional in the way he's leading. If he doesn't have some of the best individuals on his team, then I think we're seeing the result right now with FaZe. They're struggling a little bit. And then one would argue that, okay, you've been struggling for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Now Karrigan has had time to change the way they play, make them more structured, maybe change the approach to how FaZe are looking for the future as well and how he's conducting himself as a leader. But it does seem to me like they're just going down the same path every single time. They still rely on individuals. Whatever you see a glimpse of FaZe playing well, is because Robs is having a good series, which doesn't happen that often anymore. It's because Brokey's popping off. It's not because of some structural change or some sort of practice that's been going on within the FaZe camp that makes them a significantly more structured, a better team, or more well-versed team. So I think it's fair to point fingers towards Karrigan and be like, listen, either you need better players around you and thus make those changes and bring in some more talent or some more redefined or some fresh talent, or I think we could start to have the conversation. Maybe FaZe is not the team that Karrigan should be leading anymore. Maybe there's space for a conversation where you say, Karrigan, you've done tremendously well for yourself. There's plenty of other teams. Look at G2. G2 would be a perfect example. Put Karrigan into that team instead of Snacks. They'd be much better and much more consistent. But maybe FaZe is not the right home for you anymore.
Thorin, what do you think about that? Do you think maybe the buck stops with Karrigan?
I do think in this team, we've gotten to the point where I actually think you can question every single member of the team. I think that is totally fair. So I would include Karrigan within that. I mean, I put it this way. Whenever we come to in-game leaders, because obviously we don't just judge them on fragging, one thing I would say is this, is I think of it a bit like football managers. Everyone knows that there have even been not only good, like, football managers in history, but managers that were good with the specific team that had to fire them, that eventually they did have to be fired, because what happens is it's a performance sport, and if you don't get the results eventually, unless it was something really unusual, like, no one gave you any good players, eventually you have to go and someone else has to have a go. It's similar to what Pimp said there, because I thought it was a great actual tangent at the end there. It's true. If you just imagine Karrigan being dropped tomorrow into Smax's spot in G2, wouldn't we all be super hyped? We'd be like, bro, you can win everything. You can have like an era with this team. Yeah, it's true. So similarly, we have to think otherwise, which is like, does the current Karrigan have the right pieces within FaZe? Because let's be real, he isn't one of those guys when I've complained about past Alexi B teams where it's like, as far as we know, Karrigan picked all these people in FaZe Clan. They're the people that stay there because he wants them in the team. He basically has everything run the way he wants. As Pimp says, he's not even a guy who has the traditional hierarchy of like the coach is above you and he's your boss. He's not. Everyone kind of views the coach, as like he says, as like the assistant to Karrigan, basically. And in fact, certain coaches will speculate on which ones might have even had the rule of sort of like shut up about the tactics and let me handle that part, which is, by the way, a kind of luxury I don't think any other IGL has. So I do think if you're in that position and you do have good players, eventually you have to have some results. Now, you can certainly ask, can we replace some of those players too? As I say, I think you could put every player in question in their own way. But I do think it's a valid question because for me, Karrigan is still one of the great callers. And if you look at CS2, you would actually have thought, much like Alexi B, his style should be mega successful in this game. But it has been at the beginning, and then it hasn't, as we say, when everyone else has sort of fixed their rosters and done the upgrades, etc. I also do think the project they're trying to run in FaZe is still very ambitious. I think the problem is people look at the superstar names, at these enormous names on paper who've all been winners and HLTV players, and they act like it really is like a team like G2. For me, a team like G2 is a super team of players. Look at all those insane, like 3 of those players could be the number 1 player in another team. If you look at FaZe right now, I think it's like a pretty good collection of players, but I would actually compare it a bit more to Na'Vi, which is you don't expect on paper when you see these names, you're going to have enormous firepower every game. You're going to have like a bit from this person, a bit there. Like Pimp said, you can almost tell before you even check the box score in a FaZe game. It's going to be like either Rop's had his, like bi-monthly performance where he has a series where he carries, you go, he's back, the real Rops is back. But then it's just every like half a month, like I say. Or basically you had a game where Brokey just had to pop off and got a few like impact rounds and actually played well, but it's never the two of them at the same time, plus Frozen, plus an old school Rain. Like you never actually dial up the performance on paper you'd want as the dream FaZe performance. So some of that has to be on the IGL too, because as Pimp says, if we're going to give Karrigan praise when those stars pop off, because we're going to look at how we like create space for them and cultivates their role and understands how to call for them. Well, if you give them too much rope, as it were, in this scenario, you're also to blame if they can't play sometimes. I think that's a valid point, yeah.
And I think there's just one more thing I want to add to that conversation, because I feel like you're spot on when you're saying that those individuals, that Karrigan has picked to face, they did work out in the beginning, right? It has been working out. But at some point, as you said, you get to a performance issue where if it doesn't work out anymore, then either you as the leader will have to make the tough call, which, again, it is Karrigan running this team. Surely there's some contract situation. Surely FaZe has a say in it as well. But at the end of the day, it's his team. So either you make those cuts or people will start pointing fingers at you. And I think one of the things that's happening right now, because he haven't made those changes, and fair enough for not overreacting, fair enough for giving it a shot. They have been together for a long time, but I'm sure that the major is going to be the last time we're going to see those 5 players together, unless they win it or go into a final anyway. Maybe even have made a roster change. We can I guess dive into that later. But one of the things that's being exposed right now for Karrigan, and I was looking into that during the Blast World Finals as well, when he doesn't have individuals around him that is on paper, pound for pound against other teams is better than them, then his individual skill set himself gets exposed. He's had, I think it was 57 or 58 events in a row without a positive rating, without a positive KD, which is absurd. We have to go back to 2021 at the PGL Major Stockholm, something qualifier, whatever, for him last time around to have a positive rating at an event, which is insane. That has been forgotten. That has been masked for the fact that the players around him, all 4 of them, have been so strong individually.
Yes.
But the second they stop being so strong, the second they drop just a little bit in individual level, like Robs has done, like Brokey has done, well, all of a sudden you're looking at Karrigan, and that's now all of a sudden a problem. It didn't used to be a problem, but now it is a problem that you, individually speaking, is so far behind at everyone else. And as you said, Duncan, sometimes you will have Fallen popping off, every 5 maps, and you had that with Karrigan. The problem for him is it doesn't happen more than once, every second month or something like that, and it's not good enough at this level anymore, unless you have the best players around you, which he doesn't anymore.
By the way, I'll even just throw this in there as well. The reason why I also think it's totally fair to have this discussion, even though, by the way, I'm a massive Karrigan fan, I do think he's like the potential GOAT IGL, is because if you just scale down the conversation, if people don't know, this actually was the conversation that got Hunden kicked out of Mad Lions when that team was on the rise through Danish CS and was coming to like tier 1, was when they got to tier 1. I'm sorry, I can tell you internally, I knew this. The players in the org, they had the perception of like, right, thanks, it was you. It was all you that brought us to the team, put us in the roles. But we've got to the point where we just sort of realised after a few losses, like, wait a minute, us 4 who aren't you, the low fragging IGL, have to be like twice as good as the opposition or we can't win the game. And unfortunately, when that dawns on the players, that gets old, because eventually you're just like, wait, so if a guy had just sort of played like 2% better, we would have won the game. Like, that gets them. Now look, Karrigan doesn't have the same problem Hunden does, because he has got such legendary status. And as we said in this convo, when you come out of the CS mind of like every week as a tournament, it's not that long ago in real world time, they were very, very good. So he's got, like, put it this way, he'll get more chances than any other IGL. Like, I think he's actually one of the only low fragging IGLs, by the way, that can do results like this. And it's not even rumored behind the scenes they want to cut him. Like, that shows you the incredible, like, cachet of goodwill he's built up over the years, but that will not last forever. Like, it depends who the players are. We'll say he's also, I think, sort of gotten really lucky with the timing on where some of the players in their careers are. Like, Rops already, I mean, he said it publicly, but he told me privately before. He said he was burned out after CSGO. So people like that, look, maybe he's then not going to push for like his IGL to be kicked if he's doing badly. But I think you look at these players all did also join FaZe to win. They're not here to just be in playoffs. Like, they're not at that stage of their careers. Like, all the other players that aren't Rain and Karrigan, in theory, they're supposed to get their trophies now. Like, the guy I actually do think about, honestly, this is almost where I wish we would have like a Hard Knocks type series where you see the behind the scenes of a team. The player I actually wonder about is Frozen. Because, bro, you joined this team to win the trophies. You only got one so far. Like, it can't be cool to be like actually behind MOUZ in tournaments. Like, you came here for it to be your time to do what Rops did in 2022, and you come and win all the trophies. So I actually also wonder about the psychology of the players in this mess, because like, you don't want to kick Karrigan again. They could very much look back on that one day and think what a fool I was. But at the same time, we have to win today. That's the nature of CS. There aren't excuses in CS, I'm afraid.
There's no excuses. I'm going to make excuses for them, so hear me out, because I love FaZe.
Go on, yeah.
I'm really struggling with the concept. Like, we're speaking about the pieces and saying, okay, well, maybe Karrigan needs better pieces. And granted, yes, it's not the FaZe of the past where all those players are kind of firing on all cylinders all at the same time. But they've still had, if you look throughout the year, like, we've seen Brokey have these incredible moments. We've seen Rops have incredible moments. We've seen Rain have incredible moments. And they've done what needs. There have been moments where FaZe has, I've fallen for it as well. Maybe it's the fairy tale where I've gone, oh my God, there they are. They're back. Like, we see sort of glimmers of what FaZe was, if you like, and what they could be. So is it a matter of changing those pieces, or is it just a matter of figuring out why all of a sudden they're kind of just it almost seems, you mentioned there the burnout of Robs. I wouldn't say FaZe has burnout, but it almost feels like they've kind of lost a little bit of oomph. Pimp, I mean, this is great analysis right here. They've lost oomph. What's going on?
That's why you're the best at what you do.
You know?
There's two things to it. I think Duncan, when he says goodwill, I think that's an issue for FaZe, because I think every single player within that lineup has goodwill. Obviously, Frozen is out of that conversation because he's the only one performing and he just got in. You know, you can't put a finger on what he's doing right now. And I agree with Duncan as well. He was supposed to come into FaZe and win trophies, and for some reason he missed the train, you know, which sucks for him. But he's consistently delivering at a very high level. The problem is that if you look towards Rain, Karrigan, Rops for that matter as well, and Brokey, they all have goodwill. They all have goodwill from those moments where they pop off occasionally. They all have goodwill from the moments that we all remember. So I think if you're Karrigan or if you're the FaZe management, you're looking at the roster like we are right now, and you're thinking to yourself, essentially, it could be any of those that gets cut, and essentially it could be no one. And that's a big issue when you don't have one clear point where, you know, it's easy in G2. If, let's say the G2 would start struggling a little bit, well, guess who you're going to kit next? You know, that's going to be Snacks, without a doubt. That's just the way it's going to be.
Or if in Na'Vi, Imma had kept doing badly, he obviously would have been the one to conveniently cut, right? Sure.
Exactly, and you can do that to pretty much any team out there. You even saw it with Astralis, you know, when they decided to kick Bro for whatever reason, you know, and there's always that scapegoat within a team, and there's no scapegoat within FaZe Clan, so it's very hard for them to make that change. Another thing I do wonder is, you know, from a little bit more of a strategical point of view, when they lost Twist, we all thought to ourselves, from an individual point of view, you get Frozen, which is arguably the only player that can replace Twist in terms of productivity on the server, but you also lost a big voice within the team, and you lost the guy who could pick up the secondary op. And people sometimes forget how strong FaZe were at, you know, picking up the secondary op 24 rounds into the game when we're playing MR 30 or MR 15, you know, when the score is 12-12 or when the score was 13-13, all of a sudden Twist would pick up the secondary op and then FaZe would change the tide of the game. Or when they needed a comeback or when they needed to change something, Twist would do the thing where it was a little bit more abnormal for him to do, or he would step out of the box and find impact. Frozen doesn't do that. Frozen is consistently delivering from the first round to the last round, but he doesn't change the game, or he doesn't change the tide of the game from a strategical point of view. So they lost that player who could do that. And that was a big part of the FaZe DNA, making the comebacks and, you know, winning from unbelievable positions, you name it. And I know they did it at Cologne against Liquid, and part of the DNA didn't get lost there, but we don't see that as often anymore. And I think that's because of the fact that you don't have the secondary op and you don't have the player style that was Twist, who could all of a sudden just, you know, have 3 or 4 rounds that would change the tide of the game. So they lack that play as well.
By the way, I also do think if you could go back in time now and go to the point where they were planning that move of like Twists, basically people don't know, Twists wanted out because he had options elsewhere. And he could have also stayed. So then they were figuring out, like Pimp says, like, well, who's the best replacement? And on paper, it actually looked like one of the most perfect one-for-one. It's funny because there's been 2 trades like that. One sort of worked like this and the other one didn't, which was the famous electronic Vermeer one, which you get, oh, even though the roles fit, looks, it's going to be awesome. And then obviously we know how that worked out. But I would say the other part that we couldn't have known at the time, because it was really early in CS2, remember, we'd only had a few events, and because the field was quite weak, FaZe was doing awesome at the time. They actually were the number one team. What we couldn't know back then was the game is so much about aggressive T-side rifling now. And so unfortunately, for CSGO, by the way, this lineup it could have actually been even better than the Twist one, who knows? But I actually feel like the one thing you did downgrade when you took out Twist and brought in Frozen is how like proactive the team is on the map and how aggressive they are. So unfortunately, you look at a lot of the other teams, actually what teams like G2 have, it's why unfortunately a lot of us analysts seem like, I mean, we are, like we're trashing Snacks a little bit, is sometimes he does have T-side rounds where it's like, that wasn't a strat. MOUZ just ran in and shot two people with an AK, guys. Like, if Karrigan had a play like that, he could also win a T round, you know what I mean? So I do also feel like the lineup they have in CSGO, I mean, they all were really good in CSGO. This would be an awesome team in CSGO. I feel like in CS2, though, I actually think the style isn't as great for a Karrigan style, like up-tempo calling style. Think about what people like Apex have said. They think in the international lives, you've got to have like a more like speedy calling style, and you just sort of play off the individual strength of the players. Whereas I think in FaZe, that's why we're focused on the individual aspect, because in isolation, no one's bad, but also no one's really awesome. And so the blend, something is off about the blend. Like, put it this way, if I'm making a change, this is why I find it interesting that so many people, when they even bring up the potential ones, you know, when people go on the big teams, so of these two ones right now is like either Vitality because you know about the drama, or G2 because you know they're going to lose Nico. When they look at these teams, they all do that thing where they decide which MOUZ player do they want to go to this team or that team, right? I notice some people think that the player who should join FaZe is Yimpat, whereas I'm like, bro, if anything, it's got to be exertion. You need the aggro player. I want that player to be in Karrigan's hands and see, can he do something with that? Because they do really need a change. So if I was going for a change, I'm going for the aggressive rifle. That's what I want in the game.
And allow me to go down on a tandem here as well, and you know, maybe broaden the perspective a little bit. I think FaZe Clan is going to be a case study in regards to that, because as we just spoke about, you know, on paper replacing Frozen with Twist made an awful lot of sense, and Frozen is doing well in more or less the same roles.
Sure,
but roles, you know, on the server in terms of just being placed on the server at a certain spot and playing a certain way is one thing, but I think we're learning now that roles is more than just being in a specific role. And let me give you an example of what could be very interesting for the future, and that's something when I'm nerding teams and when I'm looking at team and when I'm judging GMs, and I'm thinking to myself, do they know what they're doing, or do they have no clue whatsoever? Take MOUZ and G2 as an example. We know Nico is going to leave, and everyone is calling for MOUZ to be pushed into Nico's roles. And on paper, that makes an awful lot of sense. And I'm sure MOUZ would even sign with the purpose, knowing that Nico would probably leave, to go into those roles. But the way Nico is playing with a rifle, the way he dictates the game through his communication, is something MOUZ cannot do right now. That's something that takes years of experience. So either you put MOUZ into Nico's roles, but you also accept the fact that you have to change the way you play despite getting a 1-for-1 trade, because MOUZ cannot do the same thing. He cannot dictate the team. He cannot dictate the way you play with a rifle the same way Nico is doing, regardless of its output on the server. Same example is used in Na'Vi. People are questioning, why is Bit not more in the action places? Why is Bit not playing Emma's roles? He could do that, right? He's a better player, he's a better aimer, yada, yada, yada. You're wasting Bit at these anchor roles. But fact of the matter is, Bit can, from a mechanical standpoint, he can play Emma's roles, and he could probably do it better, if not as good, but he cannot communicate the same way Emma is doing. He cannot dictate the game the same way Emma is doing. He cannot set up the teammates around him and make them feel as comfortable as Emma is doing. So roles is more than just replacing a player 1-for-1 from a mechanical point of view. It also depends on what they're like as a person, how they communicate, how much pressure they take off the teammates, and how much they dictate the game by calling certain shots or calling certain moves in the middle of the round when it's heated. And that's going to be an issue. You know, that's the issue for FaZe Clan right now. I feel that Twist was significantly better at doing that probably Frozen are, despite him being a secondary caller, despite him being a proactive player as well. There's just levels to that conversation, and we're going to see the same exact problem happening within G2 with MOUZ and Nico if they were to make that switch, if they don't change the way they play Counter-Strike. So you have to take that into consideration as well.
Just to do a quick bigger picture, because you kind of made me want to focus a bit on this. I remember when the MOUZ thing happened when he came to G2, and all the online crit was, this is never going to work because all his roles are changing. MOUZ will never be able to play. He's going to be terrible. He's now going to be the scapegoat because it's not the roles. And it kind of, the roles conversation came up. Do you think that maybe in the last few months, Pimp, we've become a little bit, and when I say we, I'm talking about anyone watching and fans, have become, and analysts to a point, so obsessed with roles, like you said, but on paper. So this is what on paper should work, therefore nothing else works. And we're kind of forgetting that there is a lot more that comes with playing as a player. And also, not every player is just focused in on playing the exact roles. The best ones are the ones that can diversify and change themselves on the server, right?
Yeah, I I think to some degree we are. I think roles are great. I think statistical analysis and all these different pieces that are coming out in terms of roles and how certain players are doing in certain roles, it's all great, but you can't lack the nuance of the fact that it's still a human being playing said role, and communication is still, I've said it the past 5 years, and I'll say it probably the next 5 years, communication and the way you conduct yourself in terms of your communication is probably the most underrated skill set a Counter-Strike player can have, but it's also the most, I guess, the hardest skill set for us to quantify from watching from outside, right? We cannot hear the teams communicate at all times. Whenever we get a tidbit from the TOs, it's a singled out sentence, or it's something that's been narrowed out, that doesn't give away any strats or anything at all. So essentially, we can't really use it for much. I think communication and the way some players can communicate their way to have a significant role within a team is one of the most underrated aspects. And you saw it with Immer. As Duncan said, he was not performing well in Na'Vi. Everyone was calling for his head. We had conversations about Symbol maybe replacing him. I bet you if you were to ask Blade a year from now, regardless of how Immer and Na'Vi is doing, Blade would probably say that back then when Immer was not performing, what he lacked in terms of individual output and what he lacked in terms of fracking, he made up for in terms of communication, taking initiative, and making the players around him much, much better. And I think that's one of the nuances that we lack when we talk roles. Yes, you can look at the stats, you can look at the output the player has on the server, but if you don't understand what communication can do and how a player can make the guy next to him feel much, much better. If I were playing next to fucking hell, Elish back in Liquid, right? That would be great for me. My level of gameplay would be elevated. However, if I played next to Hiko on certain bomb site, I would be a fucking butt because I would never get any useful information from Hiko I could use to make my game feel better or make my positioning or my understanding of what was going on better. Immer can do that. Nico can do that as a rifle. There's very few players who can do that to that level, and that's a nuance of the whole role discussion that we don't quite understand yet, I'd say.
I'll give you one other little angle on it as well, which is, if people don't know, when I actually look, I didn't invent the individual roles in the game, but one thing I did very early on in CS:GO was do a lot of video content that was about like the concept of like how do we construct a team using these roles, basically like how many like aggressive players do you want, how many, and that was one of the aspects I feel like people have missed. People are also doing it, which wouldn't work in sports either, by the way, where they're taking like an individual player, they're looking at isolation, like he could be really good at role X, but they're acting like all players who play role X do it the same way and have the same like setup within the team. Whereas I think if, as sports would show you, I mean, the joke is the England football team would show you this. You can't just put a bunch of really good players together and then assume they'll just be awesome. Like sometimes you need complementary players. You need players who actually intentionally, by the way, play selfishly, or people play the ball to them. So I would say also one of the things I did when I tried to think of roles in CS was I actually took a page from how they do it in Dota, if people don't know, which is the actual roles in Dota, where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, originally are based just on the priority with which you take the farm in the game, which is the main resource to get your character more powerful. So I would say I often conceive of the roles like that in Counter-Strike, another 5v5 team game, in this sense, which is that you can, if you want to talk about resources, the resources in Counter-Strike would be like space. Does someone create space for you and then create an area you can go into? That's a resource someone's giving you. Does someone give you communication? Like, it's very different to be the guy who goes in first with no comms and be the guy who comes in second. It's why I've always pointed out, since he just retired, Forrest, if you don't know, looked on some of the highlights, like he's playing a super aggressive role. He played probably the best fragging role you can have in Counter-Strike, which is you're second into the site, so you get all the comms and you follow the path of the hard entry, and then you clean up the site. That's actually an easier role, even though it might look like you're going in first. And then lastly, the obvious one in the modern day is utility. Do people throw flashes for you? Do they set things up? Do they smoke off the area of the site? All these things you can give someone, much like in Dota, you give them the farm and then they become the carry. So I also think you have to ask that question, which is, I mean, I think an obvious version of a team like this that didn't work like that was when they made the Astralis super team at the beginning of the year. What they learned was you can't have those 4 HLTV top 20 players in the same team, because actually, like, probably you need 2 of them and then someone to give, like, you need people like Shush and Tessus to give the resources to the other 2. So I think that's another thing we need to think about in the game, is that there are a limited amount of resources in the game of what we can do. So the question becomes, like, who do you want to spend those resources on? You can't have like 3 players who are all like, hey, if you give it to me, I would have carried. Like, there isn't enough to give to all 3.
We'll pivot back to FaZe now, because I just like that role conversation, because I feel like it's something we haven't really touched on any desk in the last year. But now we've got to the bottom of that. Let's talk about FaZe. Nothing's going to change because the major's coming up, but just for fun, let's do the conversation, because you both mentioned it.
By the way, I do agree with Pimp, though. I'm almost certain, like, I think unless they literally win this major, they're just changing players, definitely. They have to at this point. Yeah. Like, it's been too many tournaments. So I think everything except the win, they have to change. But so I view this as, like, we're about to discuss what is going to happen, because it is going to happen soon.
There we go. So what are you changing? If you take a look at FaZe, what's coming out, what's going in?
Good question. I, in all honesty, a dream scenario for me, and that's thinking of all parties involved here. I want to get rid of Karrigan. I want to send Karrigan to G2 because I think Karrigan can go to G2 straight away, and I think G2 would be a better team with Karrigan, and I think Karrigan would be better within G2. I think that would be a fresh breath of air. One thing we also do forget that when you look at Karrigan's history, he had the history, and you know that, Duncan, as well, that he would always come into a team and they would have not a honeymoon period, but the first year Karrigan was in a team, they would be super, super good. And he would always have a tough time following up the success.
Yes.
However, he learned that within FaZe, right? And he's been there now for a long time, and he kind of overcame those demons. But he did have the first stint in FaZe where that happened. The first stint in Astralis that happened, and the first stint in MOUZ as well kind of happened. So it was part of his history. So I think if he's going into G2, I can almost guarantee you the first year G2, Karrigan, Monesi, and if they were to sign a Perfecto, whatever, they do in G2, that team would bang a lot. And that would be a very, very cool team. So get rid of Karrigan, put Karrigan to G2, and then get Twist back. I know Twist probably would love to come back. And I know Twist has hard done by Team Liquid. I think he was sold on the whole Cadian and building a new international team, and that could be a very interesting way for him to come back into Liquid and be back with the NA scene. But Liquid turned out to be a bit of a shit show. That whole Karrigan gamble didn't work out. Now all of a sudden Twist has to be an in-game leader. But I think Twist has a place as an in-game leader. I think he quite frankly is enjoying the role, but I think for Twist to maturing into that role and making it a little bit easier for him, he cannot manage players like Yakinda, who's in the biggest slump of his career right now. He cannot manage players like Ultimate, which he has to nurture into perhaps becoming a decent player. We're also seeing him drop off quite heavily right now. That's too big of a task for a new in-game leader. However, if he were to come into FaZe, back to players he knew from back in the day, back to players that he's been playing with for a long time, I think Twist could manage an in-game lead FaZe, give them a fresh breath of air, and activate some of those players and some of those individuals again. That would make FaZe a better team, and it would also make Karrigan a happier man going to G2 and also make them a better team. So I think that's a dream scenario and a win-win scenario, but that's one of many solutions, because I also do think that you could get rid of Robs. I also do think you could get rid of Rain. I also do think that you could get rid of Brokey. I think Brokey has fallen off dramatically, and Brokey is a player that he's as far away from a systematic player as you possibly can be, and that's very cool when things are working out, because he changes the game for you. He wins rounds that are not supposed to be won, but you mentioned it even yourself, Duncan. Son Payers would be a great pickup instead of him, and maybe make the team a little bit more stable and a bit more structured. So keep Karrigan, get Son Payers instead of Brokey. That's another avenue. But I think a dream scenario for me, something I would love to see, Twist back to FaZe, Karrigan to G2, and everyone will be happy.
Do you think Karrigan goes to another team, or do you think he retires? And the reason I asked this, Pimp, is just because my understanding is he has a lot of, we've spoken about with the coaching setup. He has a lot of say. He has a lot of money too, so he can retire if he wants. But he has a lot of say in how things are run. And FaZe, as the players, have a lot more sort of pull in. My understanding is in the organization, they decide what their schedule looks like and things like that. Yes. Do you really, at the end of your career, where, like you said, you got a lot of money, you've got all these trophies, you've had this freedom, you really want to move to another organization that's going to get back to those weird debates and discussions that have to happen with managers and arguments about how things are going to be done and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think what motivates Karrigan the most is first and foremost adversity and new projects. I think he absolutely loves going into a new project. Think of him when he took, was it Envious or something like that for 6 months or 4 months? Went into that project and made them look somewhat decent. I think he thrives in that environment. I remember Karrigan when he joined Envious, I thought to myself, okay, listen, dude, you get a paycheck for 4 months, your salary is great, and then you join a better team afterwards. And I respect you for that. Listen, take the money while they're at there. But I remember him having 120 hours played the past 2 weeks on Steam, leading into some tournament for Envious or some major qualifier for Envious, where I thought to myself, dude, are you that motivated to lead? Was it Nifty back then playing? Some weird-ass players that never got himself anywhere, and he was that motivated in a new project. So I don't think Karrigan is going to go out, and the last thing we hear of Karrigan, the last thing we remember of Karrigan is 58 events, not with a positive KD, and FaZe not winning anything for half a year. So yeah, I think he's very motivated to, in all honesty, maybe try something new.
I know what she means, though, Pimp, because it's true. Like, at this point, like, in the same way as, obviously, Forrest just rejoined Nip, in the same way as Nip is iconic with Forrest, you think of FaZe Clan, the joke is Karrigan is the player you think of, which, by the way, is pretty impressive, because they did have Nico and Guardian and all these truly great players. Like, you even think of Karrigan over Rain, who's been there the whole time. So all I would say is this: I know what you mean. Like, if he wants to do it, he can do it. But when I think of, like, sports history, like, if you're the man where you've been there, you're iconic in that one franchise, guys, and they've changed everything over all the years just for you. What, you're then just going to up and leave them in a bunch of trouble? Who are you, Nico? Think about it. Think about it. You did it twice. Think about it. All I'm saying, you know.
I respect a player who's looking out for himself, and I think Karrigan will. Karrigan will look out for himself.
By the way, I do agree, though. Pimp did nick one of mine there. The two obvious people I would do the gamble upgrade on. And by the way, all these moves are gambles. That's why we said, even though everyone's in question, that's actually part of the reason why nobody's actually bad enough that the obvious person you have to cut. It looks systemic in the team. So it might even also, by the way, be one change you need, and maybe everyone else looks fixed and suddenly they're all way better. Unfortunately, I'm with you. First person I'm thinking of in terms of playing style actually is Brokey. Even though, by the way, I have to immediately say apologies to Brokey because you're actually too good for me to even say you should be cut. Like, in theory, almost any other team would love to have a player like this. Like, by the way, if this player could go and join like a team, they should probably take it tomorrow, mate. They could actually win a tournament with him. He's really good. The problem is, though, I agree. As a style of player, he's not the guy that exists within a system and does the same thing every round. So he can be a little unreliable for the AWP, unfortunately. And then secondly, I also just think if you look at the squad that they have, he's the person, because he's the AWP, where you think that's where I could get a more dominant player who could give me a more consistent output. I could base a team on. The other one, obviously, is if you want to upgrade Rain, because he's just so old and he's done that one style for the last few years. And if you want, I mean, Karrigan even said it himself. Apparently, within their team, they don't really have a playbook for Rain. It's more like Rain does similar things, and then I guess him and Karrigan just have amazing comps. So they kind of they know what he's doing basically. The player I mentioned earlier is, I just think of the role Rain plays, and I imagine if you put exertion from MOUZ into that position there and gave Karrigan exertion, I think you would actually see, first of all, he's that far from that player of the year conversation already in MOUZ. I think this guy could take you to the top of the world. So it's not even both. Either of those moves, I think, would be straight fire gambles. Again, they're gambles, but they're the kind of gamble where I could see 3 months later, you look at the headlines, wow, when FaZe wins another tournament, it's like all those types of gambles that could fix everything in the team. I actually think, by the way, it's why this team's the most interesting to discuss. You can not only change every piece, but you might only need one change, and suddenly the team might be fourth in the world or third in the world or something. I think there's actually a lot to be gained from the players who stay.
I think that's also one of my thought processes, that if you're Karrigan, obviously going to G2 or leaving yourself or getting kicked, I don't think that's going to happen. It's a dream scenario for me. I also do think that if I'm Karrigan right now, I'm probably looking towards Frozen, and I'm thinking to myself that, knowing Karrigan as a person as well, he does take pride in, he did take pride in bringing Robs into FaZe and molding him into what Robs is today and winning a lot of trophies with him. And that means something to Karrigan from a sentimental point of view. And I also do think that Karrigan, if you were to ask him, I'm not sure if he's let down Frozen, but I think the team has let down Frozen. And I think if Karrigan should find new motivation within FaZe or find new angles of motivating himself, by staying in FaZe, then one of them is looking towards Frozen. You brought him into the lineup and you wanted to do that for such a long time, but you couldn't because everyone within FaZe was doing well for themselves and there wasn't the right timing and all that kind of stuff. Then when you finally bring in Frozen, you're not really delivering anymore, not as an in-game leader, not as a team, and not on behalf of Frozen. So if you're Karrigan, that's a way of finding motivation. That's a way of making sure that Karrigan at least is 100% motivated to then maybe make the roster change that you're speaking about, bringing in Exertion instead of Rain, bringing in Sun Payers instead of Brokey. I would even argue that, as you said before, Jimfat, it's maybe not the most obvious move, but I think Jimfat is such a strong player and can be molded into such a strong player that I would even engage the conversation and maybe figure out a way. Is there a way that we can make him fit into our system? And can we make him fit instead of Rain? Can we make him fit instead of Robs? Can we send Robs somewhere else where he's perhaps not burned out anymore? And that's another thing that when we discuss these roster changes, we don't know where the players are at in terms of their state of mind.
Sure.
If Robs is burned out right now, then Robs should be replaced.
Yes.
Simple as that, and
yes.
It is what it is in that regard. Same could be said for Karrigan. If he's losing motivation, if he's starting to lose belief in the project, then he should be replaced. But we don't get that information, so it's hard for us to speculate on that. But that's why, as you said, it's so interesting with FaZe that you can essentially replace every single player apart from Frozen, and it can on paper at the very least make sense.
By the way, it also depends how much money we've got. If you've got enough money, then you know what? Go ahead and purchase one of those little Monacy lottery tickets that everyone apparently behind the scenes is trying to get a whole bunch of. Just buy one, because I'll tell you another thing. If we just put Monacy instead of Brokey, we can start next year immediately. I'm ready to make all sorts of crazy videos. Give me that. Just give me Karrigan plus a generational talent, and I will hype the fuck out of it.
Does FaZe have, I don't follow that stuff, that whole buyout situation that happened with FaZe. Do they have the money to go off and buy a Monacy?
No one really knows. That's the biggest problem is ever since that company got sold or whatever that thing that happened with it is, no one really knows, because if you notice, that around the time that purchase was happening was when that like the Frozen deal happened. So no one really knows. Do they have the money to do it? Is that even a reason they've sat on the roster? Unfortunately, it's actually one of the orgs, which I don't know how they do this, because if you don't know, at events they actually are very sort of like forthcoming. They're quite a cool org. They seem really open, but somehow like none of the behind the scenes stuff seems to leak out. If you notice, like we don't really we have no clue what their GM thinks or who he's thinking about and stuff in the same way as we do know about G2 and Vitality and some of the other. So bizarrely, it's actually one of the teams that's done a really good job. If there's any discontent, we never hear about it. It never leaks out somehow. Like don't you think that's actually crazy, Pip? This is one of the only top teams I've never heard of behind the scenes where people even like want to cut the player or do that. Like all those stories about Twist and stuff, they come out voluntarily if the player says it in an interview. That doesn't seem to leak out aside from that.
Yeah, they're very tight-knitted in that regard. That's true. I know back in the days, at least, when they first got into the scene, obviously the rumors would FaZe were they had a lot of budget, they had a lot of money, and I think they've even had, did I read that a couple of weeks ago, that Olaf Meister have been on contract with FaZe the past 6 years, and we didn't even know about that, you know, which...
That's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, it is wild, but I think it's true, actually, and I think, you know, if I know the contract from back then there was no sort of deal of if you're not playing or if you're on the bench, you get half your salary, or
you get a pretty nice little fucking retirement pension from FaZe.
My assumption is they have money, but also, as you said, with the takeover and everything else, it doesn't matter.
Now in his career, Olaf should be in a room like Sam, where it looks like some sort of elderly, like late stage life care room or whatever.
That's true. But then again, when you come to think of FaZe, you know, the signing of Rups, if I'm not mistaken, was that when his contract was about to run out, so they probably didn't pay that much money.
Yes.
Same for Frozen, as far as I'm aware. Frozen contracts was not far away from running out, so probably very cheap as well. So when was the last time FaZe splashed big money? When they signed Brokey, they signed him as an FPL player. You know, he was free. So I don't know if FaZe is the type of team who would walk out and spend the money on a Monacy or even on a Simple or whatever that may be. But again, as you said, that also kind of narrows down the field of players you can get. I think Son Payers right now is and should be one of the most attractive players out there. I think he's hard done by being in Falcons.
Absolutely.
And I think Falcons have been a bit of a better version of NIP, as if you go to Falcons, you know, your time in Falcons doesn't count, you know. And I think Son Payers could be one of those players that will show us that for the future.
On the topic of MOUZ, though, because we keep bringing up the players from MOUZ, and it's not the first time, because I've heard moves in Vitality and MOUZ players have come out, and then Falcons and MOUZ players. Is MOUZ after the major just gone? Because it feels like everyone is talking about how all the big teams are just going to come in and grab all those pieces as fast as they can.
As far as I can tell, almost every top team, as long as they don't primarily just speak Russian, is that meme of the guy in the street in the stock Getty Images photo, and it's their current teammate next to them, but they're looking back at insert whichever mouse player you want. If they need an IGL, they're looking at Shuhei. If they need an aggressive rifler, it's Exertion. If they need that clutch player with it's obviously Yimfat, isn't it? I will say it, no one's looking back at Torji, but you know what? Welcome to MOUZ for the next 3 years, Torji. It's all good. Someone has to stay. Someone has to be left behind. But no, it's true. I actually feel like the saddest thing is, because everyone sort of knows in the industry, MOUZ is a team, if people don't know, just like Ents, who could actually, if they wanted, keep the players. Like they can go to their investors and say, we need to raise this much to match what we're being offered. And by the way, they can do it. But the problem in that scenario is, because it's like, you know, the org's doing it as a one-off, it's not their typical route. It means basically almost everyone has to say, yes, we all agree to stay. Otherwise, it makes it seem like a waste of time for the other four. So unfortunately, I think everyone's cynical enough in the top end of the scene. They all know that these are the players that could just fix their team immediately. And remember, they're all super young. They're all like just starting to peak. By the way, I'd imagine also they aren't on the same contracts in MOUZ, so they're also all going to be really hyped to join teams where you can win everything and get the massive paycheck and be the player, etc. So I feel like it's one of the rare times in history I've ever seen where really you actually can just look around the top teams and all just go, why don't we all just eat that team over there and then we'll all get better, basically, because we're going to actually have to sort of sacrifice MOUZ like some demented CS fertility ritual, but in sacrificing MOUZ, we will make the other teams in the top four better somehow.
That's true. You know, you're looking at a Vitality. Jimfed going to Vitality makes an awful lot of sense. Exertion maybe going to FaZe makes an awful lot of sense. Shuhei is another great example. You know, I even think you could replace Shuhei with Karrigan, and FaZe will probably be, again, an interesting team. Whether they'll be better or not, I don't know, but that will bring in a different leader style, so to speak, a bit more structure. I don't think Brokey would work in that system, but then take Torsi with you or take Son Payers in. I don't even know at that point. I will say as well that I think one of the underrated aspects of it, and I guess that's from a financial point of view, that we are heading into a new era of Counter-Strike with no partnership teams, and I know from behind the scenes, and it's getting more and more public, that yes, there may not be partnership teams, but the way the rankings are going to work out, some of the appearance fees for these teams are going to be somewhat the same. But I do think that some of the teams right now are on the fence, are spending too much money before they know what the landscape is actually going to look like. Same could be said for the majors. The major in Paris apparently, was it 6 times or 7 times more revenue in terms of stickers than anyone had budgeted with, and then the last major was nowhere near that. So I think the teams right now are in a position where they wanna see it out, before they go out there and spend 600K on the next Monday. So I could imagine, that some of the big teams out there in Vitality, in FaZe, they are a little bit limited on budgets, and if the MOUZ players still have 2 years left of their contract, then who are to say that MOUZ is just not forcing them to stay and play together?
Back to FaZe now, and obviously to kind of wrap up this conversation, we'll be watching them in the RMRs. I mean, I suppose the first question is, do they make it through to the major itself? But also, getting through to the major, what the hell does Karrigan have to do to get this team into a final? Because like we've said, I mean, if they've got to win it or this whole team breaks up, right? But I mean, what do they have to do when you take a look at how they've been playing?
Do you know what's sad? That's actually what shows you that I will always have like a sentimental quality for Karrigan teams that I don't for other teams. Look, there's other people I'm biased to as well. Device back in the day, Lexi B, etc. I've got a few that I pick out, right? But the reason I know is because for a second, I actually could relate for a second there, Sam, to how evil hater fans online are. Because when you even just ask that question, like, and does FaZe even make the major? I was like, how dare you? Who the hell do you think you are? Because here's the problem. Even though, by the way, it's totally valid. If you think how nightmarish RMRs are now and how many crazy like teams there are, and remember, you have all those like BO1 rounds. Like, there's absolutely a world where anyone, in theory, could fail to one of these RMRs. Luckily, it doesn't happen very often. But I mean, the best example is like Blast Paris. If people don't remember, that Cloud9 team right before them were in like the bloody Rio final or whatever, and then they didn't make the major right afterwards. They had that nightmare run. So it is plausible they can fail it. It's just the problem is I just don't even want to think of that as a possibility. Like, in my mind, like I said, I was even being kind where I was like, maybe they just don't do that deeper run at the major. Like, they make the top 8, but then that's it. Totally fine. Because part of me is worried. Like, by the way, if they do fail the RMR, then yeah, all the stuff we've taken in this conversation times 1,000, like, they'll definitely have to make player changes almost instantly at that point in time. So, but with that said, on paper, they should still on average make it through. Like, as we said at the very beginning of the convo, the thing about FaZe is, beyond maybe the sore result where they did lose in an arena to like a nobody team, beyond that, they do tend to take care of the lesser teams. Their problem so far is they can't buy a win off the big teams, basically. Like, they had this one over Na'Vi, and then it turned out Na'Vi just had like their worst event of the year. So, like, that doesn't even suddenly seem that great a scalp. So, I will say, I do think if you look on average, you'd expect them to still make the major. The problem is, can they do anything at the major? And I think a lot of that, I mean, we'd have had a lot of more of a spirited, upbeat conversation in this episode if they could have done anything at the major. So I do kind of feel like, for me, just to even make playoffs of the major would almost be like a mild success with this roster at this point in time. Even though people, like, I want to believe too, and if they make the quarters and they have some sick game, I'll start to buy into the narrative that they're going to do the resurrection. But until I see it happen, I can't really. Like, I have to put it this way, I don't have to have the full-on Frankenstein. But I have to at least see like a twitch of like, electricity around the arm or something. Then I'll say, he's alive! He's alive! Rops will win the major, but I can't believe it yet. I have to, hype me a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think given the strength of Group A at the RMR as well, they should definitely make the major. I think it's tough to imagine them not making it. There's not that many quality teams in Group A. I think in general, I think without being too harsh on some of the, I think the quality of the RMR and the quality of these two groups are slightly lower than we've been used to. I think we're going to see less upsets, than we're used to. I think the top teams have found a way to distance themselves from the tier 3, tier 4 scene that we're going to see a lot at the RMR. So I wouldn't worry on behalf of FaZe, of making the major or not. I do, however, think it's going to be one of those things where it's either going to be a dead team buff, because I do think they've already made the decision to make roster changes. I don't think they're going to come in as unprepared, and waiting to see, and then they stand mid-December and maybe we make a roster change, maybe we don't. It's a big risk, because if you are looking at any of the MOUZ players, there's also 6, 7 other teams out there right now doing the same thing. So if you're FaZe and if you have a brain, you gotta move early, And I think one of the most dangerous teams coming into a major like that as a dead team would be FaZe. They can't allow themselves just
Last
throw
dance.
out the playbook and play as a dead team, and just rely on the individuals. And who knows if Rob's going to have a great tournament? Who knows if Boki is all of a sudden relieved from all sort of pressure and all sort of, many responsibilities that he still has on the server, and that frees him up in a way that we haven't seen for quite some time. So I think it's going to be one or the other. Either FaZe are going to make the playoff and maybe even make a semifinal, or at least make for a very good quarterfinal where they are close of taking down one of the better teams, or we're going to see them bow out of the group stage in a 1-3 fashion, and that's going to be all they wrote for this iteration of FaZe. So it's going to be either super, super exciting to follow them in Shanghai, or it's going to be even more so disappointing, but also, I guess, understandable to follow them in Shanghai if they were to bow out of the group stage. I would even go as far as saying that making Legends is not a guarantee for FaZe the way they're playing right now.
Isn't it weird how when we have other teams, there's always fans that feel very strongly for or against them, right? And there's always someone that's in the comments somewhere talking about how shit the team is. And this particular team, that doesn't happen that much. And even now when we were talking, so I have to laugh, Thorin, when you were mentioning there how inside you could feel that inner troll and you wanted to be shut up. I didn't want to say if they make the major. As far as I was concerned, well, they will, but I have to do this correctly in case they don't. But even for me, when you guys were talking about changing the rosters, I'm sitting here and there's this little demon inside me that's no. Don't touch it like that. You know what I mean? They're going to come back. We all believe that Karrigan's going to make this.
You know the meme where it's Bilbo from the Lord of the Rings movies. He's like, no, why shouldn't I just keep the same FaZe Clan roster for 3 years? Maybe one day it will win. That's how I feel as well. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here, even now when you're talking, I'm Karrigan can do it. Karrigan can win this. That's what I'm thinking.
By the way, I'm the worst wrestling mark of all time for Karrigan specifically. Even in these tournaments, like when they actually even win that blast rock, maybe there's still life for them. I knew I was right not to sell the stock. Yeah, they're going to the top again, to the moon. And then when they lose the next game, you're like, shit, that is reality, isn't it? Yeah, my bad.
I mean, that's the beauty of this lineup, though, right?
It is, in a way, it's the charm, isn't it? Yeah.
They're universally liked, No one dislikes FaZe.
Yes.
Even we were just in Singapore for the first time, and I guess one of the fan favorites, obviously, as it is everywhere in the world, Karrigan. Whenever he entered the stage, whenever his name was being yelled out, all the fans went absolutely crazy. So they are universally loved, and for good reason. They have given us a lot of good memories, but it just made me think, and I'm not saying you're a stupid fan, Sam, but in general, one of the things that I hate technically, but one of the things that I hate the most about, the whole community as a whole is that as a fan of a team, and I have the luxury of not being a fan of anyone, and I fucking love that because I don't have to be emotionally invested into X, Y, and Z team. I can hate Astralis as much as I want to and feel good about it. But one of the things that I hate the most from a fan perspective is that you're mad when your team is losing. You hate when they're not doing well, but you're also mad when someone is suggesting to change that team or have your best interest at heart. Me as a non-fan of freaking Astralis or me as a non-fan of G2, whenever I suggest that this could be a move that would make your team better, which would make you feel more satisfied whenever you watch your fucking team, you get mad at me for saying that. So I think that's one of the few inklings I have whenever you talk roster changes, that even if you have the best interest at heart, which we can have because we're not biased towards any of these teams, then the fans of said teams will still hate you for even suggesting to change it, while they'll also be over in a corner crying whenever they lose. So you got to make up your mind at some point,
I mean, you did say that you wanted Karrigan to leave, Pimp, and I think actually that is the
dream
point.
Scenario, yeah.
We're fans of Karrigan. I think he's.
Well, what's hilarious is if you notice how Pimp did that move. You asked him what move should FaZe Clan made, and then Karrigan did do the Nico. He just made. Why doesn't Karrigan just forget the whole project and just go to a ready-made team where he can just win it? It's like, well, you're right, Pimp. That'd be great for Karrigan. But I was like, FaZe, what? It's a great G2 move. I'm with you. It's a straight fire, mate. Yeah, it's a good one.
I don't want to be a fan of G2. I want to be a fan of FaZe, Pimp. It doesn't work for me.
That sounds like a you problem.
Fair enough. That is the fourth time you've said that to me in a conversation. So I actually think about it when other people are talking to me, and I was like, if Pimp was here, he'd say this was a you problem.
Well, the irony is that could be Pimp's tagline for his persona online. Sounds like a you problem.
You problem.
Could, there you go. Pimp sounds like a you problem.
If you had to, if you had to put your money where your mouths are now and make that call, though, do we see FaZe in the playoffs of the major? Do they make a deep run based on what you've seen? I would say yes. I think that we'll still see them do a deep run. I think that they probably drop off in the playoffs. But I mean, are you feeling that they have the potential to still do that in this particular iteration of what we're looking at?
I'll do it like this, right? I'll keep my brain and my analytical mind activated. It's borderline. Might happen, might not happen, right? I'll turn it off now. Definitely. What are you talking about, you fool? This is one of the greatest teams. These are the showmen. When they get to that stage in Shanghai, there'll be the crowd atmosphere, they'll remember Rain. He'll roll back the years. Karrigan will be doing are you not entertained? And then Rops will even win a round finally again. And then they'll be in the semis and it'll be great. At that point, they'll lose a close 3-map series to G2, but that's just because they're ready for the next era of FaZe. That was the last hurrah, the final dance.
I think the way I see it is that it's like playing on the roulette. You either choose red or you choose black, but there's the odd chance that it will end on the green 0, and the green 0 will be FaZe not making the playoffs. So if I were to go by that analogy, I think there's a higher chance of FaZe not making the playoff than there is of them making it. But I will also say that if they are making it, as I said before, it probably is as a result of the dead team buff, and I could also see them go far into a playoff like that. So it's impossible to say, but gun to my head, if I were to put $1 million on either black or red, I'd say FaZe are not making the playoff.
On that depressing note, thanks very much, Pimp. All the FaZe fans are devastated now. Let us know in the comments how much you dislike Pimp and his opinions, because I'm sure that you'll have something to say about what he just said.
Join the fucking queue, man. Yeah.
Or you can tell us what you think FaZe needs to do to change it up. Thank you so much, gents. We will be back for another episode very soon.